Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone on Facebook watching live. My name is Zenobia Harris, and I am the CEO for the Kent Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of myself, my staff, and the board, we'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Today, our webinar is hosted by one of our chamber investor members, Port of Seattle. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Commissioner Stephanie Bowman, and she'll discuss their path to recovery. Just a little information on Commissioner Bowman. Stephanie Bowman currently serves as the Executive Director of Washington ABC, which is a statewide nonprofit organization promoting policies and programs to help economically disadvantaged communities build assets through investments in education, home ownership, savings, and small business development. Stephanie has more than 18 years of experience working in the areas of transportation and economic development on both the local, on the local, state, and federal level, including at Port of Tacoma and Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce. Stephanie has been active with the American Association of Port Authorities, the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, and the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. Locally, she has served on the boards of the Plymouth Housing Group, I love that group, and the Rainier Valley Food Bank. In 2007, Stephanie was selected as a fellow with the American Marshall Memorial Foundation. I'll say that again. In 2007, Stephanie was selected as a fellow with the American Marshall Memorial Foundation, raised in Hilo, Hawaii. Stephanie moved to Seattle in 1991. She lives on Beacon Hill neighborhood in South Seattle and is an avid windsurfer. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Commissioner Bowman. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, good morning, and thank you so much for having the Port of Seattle participate today in your chamber meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity and wanted to start by saying thank you so much for reading that bio, but one thing that's not included is that I used to work for the Seattle Chamber a number of years ago, and so I am a huge personal fan of the work of local chambers of commerce. You guys are the ones that connect our local businesses and provide enormous opportunity for residents. And so thank you so much for all of your work. I think this is a even more important conversation to have with the Kent Chamber because of the way that the Kent Chamber is connected to the Port of Seattle. And I think sometimes folks outside the region might not recognize how closely tied we are, but the businesses in the Kent Valley are critical to the success of the port and vice versa. And so while we're all working through the pandemic, I know that the work of the businesses in the Kent Valley is absolutely critical for our state's economy, same as the Port of Seattle's infrastructure is critical for our state's economy. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to all the businesses in Kent, and here at the Port of Seattle, please lean on us and let us know if there's something that we can do to help you through this time. Slide 2, please. So I wanted to take just a minute and remind people, if you can go to the next slide. We'll go to the next slide in just a minute. Give people a little bit of a reminder about the assets that the Port of Seattle manages on behalf of the residents of King County. We own and operate SEATAC International Airport. We own and operate the marine cargo terminals in both Seattle and Tacoma, jointly with the Port of Tacoma. We have the West Coast's largest cruise ship terminals and busiest cruise ship passengers on the United States West Coast. We have fishing marinas and recreational marinas, both at Shill Show and at Fisherman's Terminal, which support the fishing industry, both here and in Alaska. So between all of those lines of business, we have some infrastructure that really supports all of the economy in King County and in the state. I will say with the pandemic, what's been very, very challenging is that the pandemic has hit all of our lines of business at exactly the same time. While each of you as business owners have gone through your own issues with how to respond, whether you are a small manufacturer, whether you have a warehouse and are in the logistics or industrial sector of Kent, or whether you perhaps a bank. We've all tried to struggle with how to get through the pandemic. At the Port of Seattle, it's been a little more challenging because it's hit all of our lines of business at exactly the same time. Our airport, for example, was on a normal day, we would have 67,000 passengers through the Port of Seattle. at our lowest point in the pandemic, we were at 2,800 passengers. To kind of put that in perspective for you, 67,000 passengers is about the size of the city of Kent, or a little less. And then at 2,800 passengers, it's about the size of the city of Snoqualmie. And so it was a dramatic downturn at the airport, and it's hit every single business related to the airport. Obviously, we see the impact it's had on the airlines and the number of passengers coming through. But also at the airport, we have the challenge of all of our airport dining and retail businesses, the vast majority of which are local businesses. And so imagine while all of our businesses, restaurants in the greater Seattle and King County area have tried to pivot and think about, okay, how can we do takeout? Can we start a catering business? Can we do outdoor seating? Our airport dining and retail businesses didn't have that opportunity. You know, they are just located within the airport and 100% dependent on the number of passengers that come through. And so they have been hit extraordinarily hard during this pandemic. I wanted to talk a minute about the seaport as well, and because I think that's a really keen connection with the city of Kent. The seaport, many people have not really thought much about how they got their goods during the pandemic. You know, how many of us sat at home, had the luxury and the privilege, quite frankly, of working from home and getting things delivered by Amazon, you know, whether it's your groceries or other essential goods. All of those goods that are delivered by Amazon or FedEx or UPS have some relation to the port. They've come over our marine cargo terminals. They were put in a truck that was driven by a local truck driver. They're delivered to a warehouse, most likely in Kent or in Renton in the valley. They were processed through that warehouse, put in another truck, delivered to that grocery store, or delivered directly to a consumer's home. So these are all essential workers that in my mind really haven't been highlighted the way that many others have during the pandemic. We've talked about, and we really need to continue talking about, the impact that this has had on our frontline workers, our healthcare workers, dealing with the patients and keeping our community safe, as well as our law enforcement and fire departments. But I just wanted to remind people that the longshoremen, the truck drivers, the warehouse workers, all have kept our economy going, and Kent is a really big part of that. So as we're looking at our businesses moving forward with the Port of Seattle, we're both trying to support bringing back passengers through the airport, but making sure that our marine cargo terminals are operating so that we can get those goods to the people of King County. Another thing I want to talk about, which doesn't have necessarily a direct impact on the city of Kent, but is a regional asset, is our cruise terminals. We've got two major cruise terminals at the Port of Seattle, Terminal 91, which is in the Ballard area, and then 66, which is on the Seattle waterfront. While you don't think much about cruising, probably if you're from another part of the state outside of the city of Seattle, the cruise business actually has a big impact on the regional economy. There are literally thousands of businesses that are related to the cruise industry, whether they provide supplies for the ships, things like croissants and flowers, and whether we have employees that are working on the ship or again delivering those goods to the ship. There is a huge economic impact for the cruise industry. What we've experienced during the pandemic is that cruise was one of the first things to shut down entirely. And so on a normal year, we'd have over 100 cruise vessels coming through the Port of Seattle. We have had no vessels come through this year. The direct economic impact to the port is a little over $26 million, just that line of business alone. So we've lost $26 million by not having any cruise ships coming through. But again, that's just the direct impact and not the indirect impact of all of the jobs associated with that and all the goods and services provided by businesses throughout the county. So it's been a rough time. I'll be really candid with you when trying to run the airport and the seaport and manage the cruise business and think about how do we do all of those things in a safe environment has quite frankly been about the biggest challenge that I can think of for any elected official, and particularly at the port. Next slide, please. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Port of Seattle is doing to move on. Before I get there, just to put the whole pandemic in a little bit more perspective, you can see from this slide where we were in terms of what happened at the different industry shocks, as we call them, over the years. So 9/11, as we all remember, whether you were in the aviation industry or not, we all had a very good sense of the enormous decline in air travel. At that point, you could see from this slide, we were just under about 27 million passengers, big decline. Those numbers started to go up in terms of air passengers, and then the Great Recession hit in 2008, 2009, and our enplanements at the airport, number of passengers coming through, stalled. Once we got through the Great Recession, those numbers started to uptick again. The economy is getting better, people get to travel again, they get to see their families, there's a lot of business travel. Seattle, SEATAC International Airport is the hub airport for Delta Airlines and its Asian business. It's obviously the hub airport for Alaska Airlines and West Coast domestic air travel. And so we're in a key spot. So our enplanements continue to go up over the last 10 years, and then the pandemic hits. If you can see from this slide, we are expecting what we're experiencing right now, and what we expect to continue to happen is that this is far greater impact than the Great Recession and the impacts of 9/11. So with all that, next slide, please. We are the Port of Seattle commissioners, my colleagues and I, got together with our CEO and thought, what are the things that we have to prioritize? We have to, number one, stabilize our lines of business and continue to provide those essential services to the community. So number one, many people may not know this, but our airport and seaport, again, remained open 24/7. We have never had a single hour that any of our facilities have been closed during the pandemic. We continue to provide the infrastructure to help the economy move forward. But with that, as I started to mention earlier, at the airport, I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we've done. With our airport dining and retail tenants, we provided immediate rent relief for our tenants and barred any evictions due to the inability to pay, whether at the airport or at the seaport. We've offered lease extensions to our tenants so that they have a chance to amortize their investments, particularly at the airport, where a lease for a business at the airport is quite expensive. It's an expensive place to operate in normal times, but it's a very difficult place to operate now with very few passengers. We have our economic development division at the port, which is involved with the Kent Chamber, has really leaned in and provided a lot of webinars for small businesses and tried to think about how we can provide resources, grant funding to communities. What can we do to support our local communities when others have not been able to do so? On a related note, I wanted to say that I was meeting with the state legislator yesterday. And this legislator from King County mentioned to me that, while the port has seen enormous declines in our revenue and hugely impacted to our businesses, we all need to recognize that our local cities are really struggling, and many of them are on the brink of bankruptcy. And that should be a huge concern for everybody on this call. So where I see the Port of Seattle's role is continuing to support our cities and our residents throughout all of King County, both by providing those essential services, but again, also those economic development opportunities that could help us all come back from the pandemic. While others are not able to provide funding or other grant opportunities, we're trying to find ways to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So with that, I wanted to, next slide, thank you so much, talk about some of the things that we're doing at the port to keep the economy going. Again, you're probably very familiar when you've read the newspaper over the last couple of months about transportation projects that were shut down, capital projects that were shut down, building projects that people put a big hold on, whether it's a residential project or a commercial project. At the Port of Seattle, we decided actually to do the opposite. We just thought, for every dollar that we continue to spend, particularly on the capital side, investing in infrastructure, is providing paychecks for our construction workers, for the engineers, for the architects and designers, for everybody associated with our capital program. If we can continue to build at the airport and throughout the rest of our facilities, we're providing a paycheck directly or indirectly to thousands of residents in King County. So with that, we just continued on with our program. One is our international arrivals facility, which you can see from the slide is almost a $1 billion project. We've got a couple of other major ones at the airport. The North Satellite, which is the home to Alaska Airlines. If you've been out to the airport in the last 6 months, you've seen the renovation of the North Satellite, beautiful new Alaska lounge. There's still a lot more work to do, and we're continuing on with that program despite the pandemic. Another thing that we're doing at the airport, which you haven't had the opportunity to see and probably won't, but you will experience it, is our baggage optimization program. This is the more than 14 miles of baggage conveyor belts that are underneath the entire airport that get you your bag from the airplane to the airport, so you can pick it up and go home as quickly as possible. I've said a few times before, if you saw how your bag traveled from through those 14 miles of conveyor belts, you would be shocked that you get it in 20 minutes from Alaska Airlines. So it's a pretty arduous journey, and this is an old system and it's a very expensive project, but we decided to continue with the upgrade again despite the pandemic, because this is the opportunity to lean in and do those things. In addition to what we're doing at the airport, we're also continuing with our upgrade to Terminal 5, which is our largest marine terminal up in Seattle. That terminal, we 2 years ago made the decision to reinvest in it so that it could handle the largest vessels coming through the Panama Canal once the Panama Canal was expanded a few years ago. So now we're able to handle the largest ships, which then again require the largest cranes in the world and reinforcements to the docks. That project will be completed in about 12 to 14 months. And again, there's hundreds and hundreds of jobs associated with the rebuilding of that terminal. And we made the decision to continue forward with that during the pandemic because of the job implications. Next slide, please. I wanted to touch on, next slide, thank you so much. As I've been saying, in addition to our capital program, continuing those essential construction jobs, we also, my colleagues and I, wanted to think about where we could invest where others were not able to. And we picked two specific areas. One is providing support for tourism. Now, you might think this is an odd time to be thinking about bringing tourists back, or at least it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And what we decided with that was working with the Washington Tourism Alliance, which is a statewide organization that promotes tourism on behalf of all of Washington state. We looked at Washington and said, we need to find a way, once it's safe for people to travel again, we need to bring them back to Washington. Every state is experiencing the same issues. We have all heard in the news about the 14-day quarantines in certain states or cities like New York or Hawaii. And the impact of those quarantines are unbelievable to those city and state economies. While we haven't had those same quarantine obligations here in Washington state, we have seen an enormous decline in tourism. And I can say, quite frankly, it's not coming back the way that we had hoped it would. We all know that the summertime is our peak tourism season here in Washington, and particularly in the greater Seattle area with our wonderful weather, but we have not seen the big increase in tourists that we were hoping to see as compared to other large metropolitan areas. Two things that we track that by are, one, the number of passengers that come through SEATAC Airport, and also the number of hotel rooms that are occupied. And I can say I sit on the board of Visit Seattle, which helps run the convention center. And we're constantly tracking hotel nights in King County. And Seattle and the King County region are at about the bottom quartile compared to other major US cities. So between the lack of passengers and the lack of hotel rooms, we can see that we have an issue region-wide about people not coming back to this region. And I think that this calls for a regional conversation about how do we promote the greater King County area and Washington State, again, as a safe, healthy place to come and visit. I personally think we have enormous, wonderful assets throughout the state of Washington, whether it's Mount Rainier, whether it's the Olympic Peninsula, whether it's the Columbia River. We all know the great things that we have, and yet I think with the pandemic, people are making different decisions about where to travel. When hopefully, 3-6 months from now, we have a vaccine and people are willing to travel again, Port of Seattle and all of the cities in King County, I'd like us to be able to work together and think about how we make King County the place that people throughout the United States want to come back to or visit for the first time. So I'd really welcome a conversation with the Kent Chamber about how we promote all of King County and getting you all involved in that. So in addition to our tourism support, another initiative that we undertook is employing youth. And again, that may seem like, okay, we've got so many issues with the pandemic. We've got our frontline health care workers and thinking about what they need. We've got all of these businesses that are either shuttered or trying to figure out how to keep their doors open. And I looked at all of that, and there's many people working on all those issues. But I thought a lot about our youth in King County. And I actually use the term, I think that there are voiceless victims in the pandemic. We've seen the challenges that I'm sure many of you on this call have experienced personally of trying to just provide basic education to our students. And we've had so many challenges with that, whether it's lack of broadband service, whether it's a lack of having the technology, a laptop, or the very real challenge of having youth at home while parents are trying to work, whether at home or still go into an office or perhaps be a truck driver. It's just been, I think, probably one of the most difficult challenges with the pandemic is thinking about how do we keep our kids educated during this time. But in addition to being educated, we also have to keep them actively busy in a very healthy way. And one of the things that I don't think many of us considered was the loss of opportunity for youth during the pandemic for just a simple summer job. If whether you were a lifeguard or you're working at a fast food restaurant, your first job out of high school or in high school, those, as we all know, those opportunities vanished with the pandemic. So looking at all of that, I went to my colleagues and I said, is there any way that we can partner with community organizations to provide jobs for our youth? So we created the Opportunity Initiative, which provided youth 16 to 24 with summer jobs. I'm really proud to say that we partnered with 8 different community organizations throughout King County. They varied from El Centro de la Raza to the Duwamish Youth Corps. Kids had the opportunity to work outside and do environmental remediation and sustainability projects, as well as just getting basic office skills. With the funding that we provided to these community groups, we provided 220 jobs to youth this summer. In addition to that, we have 25 internships that we did virtually, like most organizations. But we had 25 internships. So all told, just under 250 jobs for our most impacted youth in King County. And I will say I'm really proud. I saw the virtual event with our interns about a week ago, and these interns are coming from our most impacted communities. We had asked our staff, when we're looking at these job opportunities for youth, to make sure that they went to the kids most impacted, coming from the lowest income homes, or those homes where one of their parents might have lost a job due to the pandemic. So again, it was a really targeted program to help the youth that needed the help the most. Next slide, please. So with that, where do we go? Thank you. From that, continuing our partnerships with our cities in King County. We've had a really great relationship with the city of Kent over many years, and I really wanted to take an opportunity to call out the Economic Development Division within the city of Kent. you have some outstanding people that work in your economic development division. I've had numerous meetings with them over the years, and they're always looking for opportunities both to partner with the city of Kent and to find new businesses to come in. I recognize very much that the city of Kent, while you play a really critical role in terms of the manufacturing and industrial center of the valley, that Kent is more than just warehousing. It's been warehousing in the past, and we hope that that will continue forward because we need that, but I know that there are other opportunities for Kent. And so with that, the Port of Seattle partnered with the city and provided a $65,000 grant for doing apprenticeships and advanced manufacturing training. This was, as you can see from the slide, a technical training program for incumbent and dislocated workers in the Kent Industrial Valley. And so we're again trying to find ways to help those most in need move forward at this really critical and tough time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you so much. With that, I wanted to move on just briefly and talk about what we're doing at SEATAC International Airport in particular, because I think it's our one facility that almost everybody has been through, and let's hope that you're all going to come through again in the next couple of months as we can get back out and visit our family and friends. We have an initiative at SEATAC Airport that is we refer to as Fly Healthy at SEA. And this is our effort to look at every single aspect of the airport and think of how can we make it safer and healthier for people to come through so we can increase the confidence of passengers to want to fly again. Like almost every airport in the country now, face coverings are required. We have more than 200 protective barriers up. The airport looks a lot different than it did 4 months ago. If you haven't been through it, it has a dramatically different look. And I don't think that I'm biased to say it feels a lot safer than almost any other airport that I've been through. Again, we've got a lot of new protocols, as other businesses do, for dining and retail, but we are trying to encourage folks to use our dining and retail opportunities. Those of you, if you have not traveled yet, or if you have, you've learned that the airlines are no longer offering food. So we really encourage you to pick up a to-go package from our local airport dining and retail locations before you get on the plane. They could really use your business. In terms of the health protocols that we've undertaken, as you can see from this slide, incredibly frequent sanitation, whether it's touchless opportunities in the restrooms. We're looking at more touchless facilities going through our TSA check lines, whether it's using your boarding pass, using your cell phone, hundreds and hundreds of hand sanitizers. We're looking at every single aspect of the airport so that people feel safe going in. One thing that you may or may not have heard about is we had a pilot program to do temperature checks on passengers coming into SEATAC Airport. Obviously, those of you that have children in daycare or in many other businesses, I know when I got my hair cut for the first time 2 months ago, they took my temperature walking into the hair salon. Well, my colleagues and I decided we need to do at least that at SEATAC Airport. Although, let me be candid, it's a much, much more challenging environment. It's not the same as getting your temperature checked when you're walking into a restaurant or a hair salon. While we face a number of challenges with that, and we recognize that that is not the end-all solution, we think it's one part of the solution for making sure that flying is safe for everybody. The other thing that we're looking at, in addition to checking temperatures of the passengers, both arriving internationally and departing domestically, is looking at different things like rapid testing for COVID. Right now, the San Francisco Airport is doing a pilot program for rapid testing of COVID for their employees. It's a new technology. There's a number of companies throughout the United States that are trying to instill this rapid testing. I'm sure that you can imagine how challenging it's going to be logistically to do that at an airport. But that's a direction that we've asked our staff to really look into right now. If you could get a test with results within a couple of minutes and know that you're getting onto a plane with other people that have been tested, we believe that's really going to increase the customer confidence in flying again. Or perhaps you get a test 24 hours before and it's good for those cities or states that you want to travel to that have the 24-day quarantine. So we're looking at everything, quite frankly. We're trying to be as innovative and as open as possible to all of the different solutions out there to get people to feel, to not just feel, but to be safer when they travel. You know, it's traveling is already challenging to begin with. And with the pandemic, we all have that anxiety when we're thinking about what is it like to go into an airport, a crowded airport, and sitting on a plane or a crowded plane and sitting next to people you don't know and you have no idea where they've been or what they've been exposed to. I myself have that same anxiety. And so we at the Port of Seattle and with my colleagues in particular on the Port Commission have really tried to approach all of our initiatives through that lens. You know, we're regular people too, and we think, what would we want to see at the airport as a resident when we're traveling through? It's a challenging situation because the airport runs 24/7. And so we're trying to install all of these programs while continuing operations with not an hour of downtime whatsoever. But I give a lot of kudos to our staff. I feel like we're really moving in the right direction. And our staff has done an incredible job of, again, leaning in and going, what else can we do? How can we make it safer? Next slide, please. Thank you. I didn't want to end this presentation and this conversation with you today without talking about the other very, very critical, essential, and let's just be candid about it, overdue conversation about equity and inclusion in our community. You know, 2020 has just been an unbelievable year between the pandemic and the protest, and finally elevating the conversation about how to have a more equitable and inclusive economy and community. 2020 is something that we're never going to forget. And it's really, in my mind, provided the opportunity for us to look inward, both individually and as a government agency, in particular with the Port of Seattle. What can we do better? You know, how are we serving our community? And when I say community, I mean every single person in our community. Recognizing that we come from different places, thinking about, do we have an inherent bias that we're not maybe aware of? Are the services that we're providing to our communities in our economy, does everybody have access to those? So with that, we've undertaken at the port some really tough conversations and really dug in a couple of different areas. Number one, we have our own police force at the Port of Seattle. Many people may not know that. It does cover both the airport and the seaport, and they also provide services to our cruise terminals. We have partnered with our police department and said, you know what, we want to review our policing practices. We want to make sure that there is anti-bias training for our officers. We want to make sure that we're looking through incident reports and looking for any evidence of bias. What are the arrests like? Why were they made? Looking at a full inclusive review of how we police. I'm proud to say right now that we have not found any incidents of racial bias, but that said, our police department is really open and willing to look at these processes from start to finish. We just yesterday announced a task force that includes a lot of community members that are really going to be in charge of looking at these police practices and reviewing them and providing recommendations moving forward. Again, we haven't had the issues that you've seen in some of our major cities, but it is something that we think that we need to, as a public agency, take a hard look at. Something else that we're doing, which I'm sure you wouldn't think about the Port of Seattle doing, is encouraging people to participate in the US Census. For every person on this call, this is so critically important. We need to make sure that every person is counted in the census. This is how our federal dollars are allocated for the next 10 years. And so if you have any residents or businesses that for some reason you think have not participated, we have a whole effort at the Port of Seattle partnering with community organizations to increase participation in the census. I would urge you to contact our folks, or you could reach out to me directly and we can provide you with some resources. In addition to that, I'm going to just say the one thing that we all need to think about too is we have to get people out to vote. In order to have a more equitable and inclusive economy, every voice again needs to be counted, and that really means starting with exercising your right to vote. There is, quite frankly, no more critical election in the United States, in my mind, in the United States history than in 2020. And so I am urging and imploring every resident in King County and statewide to make sure that you get out to vote, send in those ballots. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So with that, I know I've covered a lot of ground, and I'm hoping that there's some questions. Again, we run a really large organization that we cover these essential assets for the community between the airport, the seaport, our cruise terminals, our marine terminals for fishing and recreational boating. And these are assets that the community relies on for our economy to continue functioning. So we impact almost every business in King County, and we're here to help. I would really encourage anybody that has questions with this presentation. I'd love to take them right now via the chat button. I'm not sure who's going to be moderating our Q&A, or if you have questions about anything that we're doing at the airport, at the seaport, please feel free to reach out to me personally. I'd really like to be able to be your connection with the Port of Seattle and do whatever we can to help the businesses in Kent not just get through this pandemic, but come through this pandemic stronger than we were before. We really believe that the city of Kent and the businesses of Kent are critical to the region's economy, and we need to be working together to help one another. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and again, happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner Bowman. We do have questions from Facebook Live that was sent over via I Love Kent, so we appreciate, Scott, for everything that you do here. And so one of the questions, give me 1 second, I just lost the question here. Let me pull those questions up, bear with me. Okay, so one of the questions are, is it safe to fly outside of SEATAC Airport, and have you flown recently? If so, what was your experience like?
Great questions. Yes, it is safe to fly out of SEATAC Airport. Let me just start with that. Again, let me cover a couple of the things that we've done. We have our pilot program for the temperature checks. Again, safety barriers all over the airport and sanitizing every 10 to 15 minutes. I would venture to say SEATAC Airport is about the cleanest place that you will go through of any facility. So believe me when I say that when we're thinking about passenger safety, it's from the minute you walk in the door of SEATAC Airport. We want to make sure that you feel as comfortable going in there as you might feel in going to a sterile environment like the hospital, because you're in contact with so many people. So with that said, I have traveled. I went down to California. My experience, it was, SEATAC Airport was great. You know, I had some anxiety getting on the plane. I flew on Alaska Airlines. I think they did a terrific job. They require masks of every passenger, and there are, in fact, if you don't have a mask while you're traveling both at SEATAC Airport or on Alaska Airlines will ask you to remove you from the plane. So I just want to remind people this is a requirement at SEATAC and to fly on Alaska Airlines and many of our other airlines as well. It should be. I will say Alaska Airlines, big shout out to them. They have done a tremendous job in terms of their sanitation and air filtration on the airplane. It's a complicated system, but it is very, very good air that's coming through those planes right now. And they've done a good job of generally separating the passengers. I think that all of us in the Pacific Northwest, maybe because we were the first big city to experience the pandemic, we all know that it was occurring for a couple of months before it really came out in the press and in Kirkland in the adult facility. That said, Alaska Airlines, I think, has done a really good job of thinking about, as our hometown airlines, how to make the traveling experience safe, as has Delta. But Quite frankly, I was pretty anxious going, not into the airport, but getting on a plane. It felt a little weird, sitting next to everybody en masse, but people were really respectful. I got off in LA. LA is, again, one of those communities where they've had some pretty severe outbreaks. It felt different in LA. I'm pretty proud of the residents and businesses in King County, the way that we've responded. It's not the way that LA has responded. But I would say that I would highly encourage people, as long as you don't have a pre-existing health condition, please think about traveling again. Maybe just make it a short trip. Travel in state, maybe go to Spokane, just go down, take a short trip to Portland, a short trip to California, but I felt very safe traveling.
Yeah, the chamber was able to do tours of Port of Seattle and Alaska and airlines and everything. And I mean, the sanitariness, I mean, you guys have it down pat. So we do appreciate it. I actually sent my daughter on a plane about a month and a half ago, so she was pretty comfortable. So it's nice to know. So the next question is, could you talk a little more about the use of the third runway? Some area residents say it's increased recently, and they're wondering why.
That's a good question. I don't know why it would necessarily increase, but I'm happy to go back to our airport staff and figure that out. I'd say in general, passengers, enplanements, number of passengers through the airport has started to uptick. And so my guess is that that's most likely what you're hearing is just, increased planes coming through. Think about, again, on a normal day at SEATAC, a normal day this time of year would have 67,000 passengers. And at the lowest point during the pandemic, we had 2,800 passengers. I mean, the airport was absolutely empty. I actually live up on Beacon Hill, as you mentioned when you were reading my bio. So I'm one of those, I'm actually the only port commissioner that lives south of I-90. And so I am directly impacted by the noise at the airport, just like those communities that residents that live in communities directly around the airport. So I'll admit, in March, in April, in May, it was pretty quiet in Beacon Hill, as I'm sure, much more quiet as it was in Burien, SeaTac, Des Moines, Federal Way, etc. As the planes have started to come back and fly again, you're hearing an uptick in noise. It's only, again, a third. We had 20,000 passengers through SeaTac about a week ago. So it's about a third of what we would have on a normal day, but I would guess that that's what you're hearing. But if with a specific question at third runway, I'm happy to go back to our staff and get an answer to that. If whoever asked the question just wants to email me directly, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, thank you so much. And the next question is, what about the cruise ship industry? How has the pandemic affected that? Do you foresee a recovery in that section soon?
Great question. I think the cruise ship industry is the single most challenged industry through all the pandemic in terms of their long-term economic impacts. So as I said earlier in the conversation, on a normal day, we'd have a normal summer, we'd have over 100 cruise ships coming through the Port of Seattle. We had zero, no cruise ships this summer at all. We kept thinking as the pandemic continued on, the cruise ship companies were still thinking they were going to resume. And first it was going to be the end of June, then it was going to be the end of July, then it was the end of August. And they finally decided, nope, no cruise ships through the Port of Seattle and no cruises up to the state of Alaska for this summer. I personally think that is a great decision. And here's why. When you're thinking about taking a cruise, it's two things, right? It's one, similar to traveling on an airplane, you're on a vessel with a lot of people, hundreds, thousands of people that you don't know for an extended period of time. And so it's really incumbent upon the cruise companies to be able to make sure that they have a way that the passengers are safe, that they have testing of them before they get on the cruise ships, or at least have a good sense of where they are physically. What we're experiencing with the cruise ship industry is that they have not yet been able to figure out how to get passengers on and do all of the necessary cleaning in the way that they have in the past. And so by that, I mean specifically, there's a few cruises that are starting to operate now out of Europe and a few out of China. But the larger cruise ships that you see on the Alaska cruise vessels, which are about 4,000 to 5,000, Those are big vessels. There are a lot of people, they need a lot of cleaning and a lot of safety and health protocols to be in place. And then you think about the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska is isolated. And so the last thing that they want and that we want in Seattle are for cruise ship passengers to be coming into our community that have COVID and then are spreading it as they leave, travel through Seattle or travel to the state of Alaska. So in partnership with the state of Alaska, the Port of Seattle, working with our hometown cruise companies, are taking a step back and saying, what can we do to make sure that the vessels are safe? That's on the cruise ship industry. For the Port of Seattle, how do we make sure that our cruise terminals are safe for people to travel through? You travel through a cruise ship terminal similar to how you travel through an airport. You know, you get checked with your ticket, you go through security, et cetera, et cetera. So how are we screening passengers, whether we're doing temperature checks or rapid testing? So the same things that we're going to be doing at the airport, we're going to need to do at the cruise ship terminal. And then again, for the state of Alaska, they have to be able to know that the people coming on cruise vessels are healthy. The last thing that the state of Alaska can do is have sick people coming into their community because they're so isolated, just like the state of Hawaii. So the two really need to, we need to work in partnership with all three. In terms of the long-term outlook for the cruise industry, my personal view is that cruising is going to come back. But I think it's going to, number one, look different. And I think that there is a long road ahead for recovery. Those people that have been on a cruise ship before, we've learned through a lot of polling and data that those people are most likely to go back. But people that have never been on a cruise ship before are much, much less likely right now to say that they would go on a cruise anytime in the near future. And that means the next 2 to 3 to 4 years. So the cruise industry is going to have to do a lot to regain customer confidence. You know, they were some of you saw the early stories during the early stages of the pandemic about the outbreaks of the coronavirus, both with passengers and then crew members stuck on cruise vessels. And I think that just really spoke to a lot of, you know, nobody was prepared for this. And this is an industry that needs to go over and above other businesses to ensure the safety of their passengers and their crew. So with that said, we're doing a couple of different scenarios at the Port of Seattle, thinking about what the cruise industry might look like next year. We have models that show if there's no vessels coming through, a model that shows if it's at 25%, and a model that shows if we've got half of the cruise or 50% of the cruise vessels come through. We don't anticipate anything more than maybe half of what we had last year at this point. I just think it's going to be quite a while before the cruise industry is able to really get all of those health and screening protocols in place. So with that, I'd say we're taking a slow approach, a safe approach, really again, prioritizing the health and safety of King County. The last thing that I want to see happen is that people come from other parts of the state or other parts of the country or other parts of the world to take a cruise and are bringing sick people into King County. So for me, that's the number one priority, is making sure that we're keeping our communities safe.
Agreed. Thank you for that. And the last question we have here is, what can a Kent Chamber member business owner do to help the region overcome issues caused by the pandemic? That's a broad question.
That's a broad question. You know what I'd say is that my personal view is that the more that we can have conversations, and I think what the Kent Chamber can do, let me start with that. What I think the Kent Chamber can do is work with organizations like the Port of Seattle and be the convener for businesses. We need to hear from businesses what they need, right? Because I'll take an example of the restaurant industry. When Governor Inslee first put out some of the earliest protocols about how to reopen restaurants, the restaurant industry, I think, maybe could have used more conversation with them about how their businesses actually operate. So as we're thinking through what the next phase is, getting out of the pandemic, we need to actually hear from businesses about what they need. You know, do you need more health and safety PPE? Do you need different regulations from the state or the county in order to help you reopen your doors sooner? Do you need grant funding to make sure that you can operate during this really slow time just to keep you going over the next 12 months. So with that, my answer, I guess, would be that I think that the Kent Chamber of Commerce could be the convener, bring together your local businesses with government agencies and have a conversation about how we can work together. Because what concerns me probably the most is that it does seem like the recovery in Washington state is slower than in some other states. I was actually just this morning on a call with Congressman Smith, who represents the Kent Valley and represents most of the Port of Seattle. And he and I spoke for about 10 minutes about this issue and talking about, well, why is it that it seems like Washington state and the greater Puget Sound area is lagging behind other larger metro regions in terms of its recovery? One of the things Congressman Smith said, well, you know, we had some of the greatest restrictions on businesses and economic activity of any state in the country early on in the pandemic. And I think we've also had a slower return to normal activity. While that's been appropriate, absolutely appropriate for the health and safety of our residents, we also now need to start thinking about, if a vaccine is 6 months out, how do we make sure our businesses can make it for the next 6 months? I think that's what I'm probably most concerned about. You know, now that we've had the federal programs are stalled right now, quite frankly, the extra stimulus payments, the $600 a week, we've got a lot of residents now that are going to be permanently out of work. And so I think that we need to get organizations like the Chamber together and think about, how do we get our businesses continuing to both operate and hopefully get to a place where they can start to bring back a couple of employees. As we did at the Port of Seattle with our Youth Opportunity Initiative, thinking about those that are out of work and how do we get them working again? Because again, that's my greatest concern. The longer this goes on, we've got people that are really holding on with, you know, their fingernails, trying to be able to pay their rent, you know, keep their car payments going, just struggling in every aspect of their life. And so if the Kent Chamber can work with us to bring together regional leaders and talk about what we can do to restart the economy, I think that's the best thing that you guys could do right now.
Absolutely. We are all for it. We just got finished with a government affairs meeting earlier today where, and thank you, Bill Ellis and Michelle Wilmot, for joining and being at that government affairs meeting as well. And they just went over more grants that just got approved for some of the small businesses. So we are in the works, we're in the talks, you know, we are in the know, trying to make sure everybody is, you know, communicating with each other, partnering with you guys, etc. So definitely, if any business owners have any questions or have any concerns or anything to reach out to us, please, you know, let us know, and we can find the correct people to get you in contact or help you with anyone. You know, even I see in the chat that we did put your email in the chat. So if anybody needs access to you, it'll be available. And you know, I don't see any more questions. I just see some thank yous from everyone. So I will kind of close it out with that. Again, Commissioner Bowman, we truly appreciate the Port of Seattle's support with us. We appreciate your team. We had a little bit of snag here and there, but we got it going today. You know, one of those Zoom meetings, right? So this meeting is also going to be, it's live streamed, so there will be recordings of that. We do thank our media sponsor, I Love Kent. He's always here to help spread the word for us. We will have recordings available after the fact. We also send a Friday update weekly where we do put in any of our webinars, etc., that people need to see. So then that way, if anyone missed it today, they can view that from you later on. But again, from the Chamber, we just truly appreciate all the Port of Seattle support, and we thank you for hosting the webinar for us today.
Oh, Araya, you did an awesome job. Thank you so much. And you know, I just think you just did a fabulous job. These Zoom meetings are challenging. I think we're all getting used to them, but there's always glitches. I haven't been in a single one that hasn't had a glitch yet. So, but you just did a fantastic job. And again, thank you so much to the Chamber.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Take care.